bow tie in Chattanooga, Tennessee. David Tulis.
When your chief partner is the state, it's hard to get things right. And the school board yesterday, according to one quote, is choosing among or between the lesser of two evils in its 5 underperforming schools, as they're called. The fact that we have schools that rank as underperforming and the rest obviously are performing correctly. And so what we have to do, since other people's children are involved and not ours, we will deal with the 5 bad schools and just hope for the best, hope for an administrative solution. Now, when you have a failing business, which these are effectively sort of subsidiaries of the school system, every school is a kind of a failing business, a zombie business. It is there and it's failing, and we are going to accept the fact that it's failing because somehow we accept the fact that when the state is involved, failure is inevitable and low rankings are inevitable. And here we have those whose case are so pathetic as measured by the standard measurements, which I question their reliability. But nonetheless, there are these official administrative standards for when a school is failing, a state school, a Tennessee government school. And these are failing, and we got to do something to make them better. So since you don't have a marketplace, you don't have a free market, and since the people of Hamilton County and Chattanooga accept the fact that the state controls the school system and has a school system, that body politic, those people here in Hamilton County and Chattanooga have to accept that we have failing schools, and we just have to hope for the best in the board's vote 7-2 yesterday to continue talks about having a partnership with the state to somehow remedy the outputs, if you will, the poor inputs also in these 5 schools, even though the Times Free Press story points out again, as these stories have in the past, that $11 million in grants have been injected into these 5 companies for the past 5 years to little effect. Well, the reason there's little effect and the reason more money doesn't help is that you're not operating in a market system. You're not operating in a system where there's the beauty, the power, the grace, if you will, of voluntary arrangements. These are all arrangements by compulsion and by force. The main compulsion is out of view in this story, of course, and that is the fact of taxation, that people can't own land free and clear in Hamilton County because they have to pay the state's tax and the county's portion of the state's funding of this system. And these 5 schools. These 5 schools are paid for by coercion. And everything in the operation of these schools, whether the pay for the janitor, the pay for the administrator in the back office who never teaches anybody, or should I say the administrators, plural, never teach anybody, those costs are borne by taxpayers who have no choice in the matter and who have given up trying to complain about the system as it is. Even though we have the internet today, we have effectively the end of schooling as a viable concept because information is cheap, readily available, in fact, available to all. And we don't have to pay premium for the transmission of information and wisdom and perspective to students, $10,000 or more per student, because so much is available. So you have a system that operates outside the claims of the market, outside the claims of the continually reducing cost of information and perspective and materials, right? There's so many free materials online. There's so many people willing to make an inexpensive living in the teaching field that we simply can't look at that. We have a system that we have now, and we have this huge expense. We have compulsion that makes it work, and we have administrative solutions. And Candace McQueen, the Commissioner of Education for Governor Haslam, is making statements. We are looking forward to engaging more with the community, she says, and hearing from them about their ideas for driving improvement as we work together, she says, to establish the conditions for success in Hamilton County priority schools. So we have these priority schools. When you hear the language, you think that these are the best schools, right? The way this is presented, I-zones and priority schools, it sounds as if they're actually the best ones. If you're not really thinking about what you're reading, the vocabulary makes you think them better than they are. Just the naming of the program is an argument for their success, right? These are success schools, right? The worst schools are the success schools, almost, as it were. And we all accept this. We just continue to pay. We accept this, and we are, you, my listener, the man who matters, understand how this works. But the problem that we have is getting people who don't matter as much as you do to get them along for the ride. That would be the ride of the marketplace, the ride that has respect for individuals, respect for people, respect for businessmen, and for entrepreneurship, which would fill the gap if in any retreat by the state in the educational sector would simply and gladly be filled by people like me. Okay, if I knew there was demand for, say, a class on government or a class on constitutional heritage or liberty, or a personal finance class on how to live your life as a free person, things I've thought a lot about and could probably teach people about, I might be willing to accept a stipend or a series of stipends from parents to teach their teenagers about that. But there's not demand because the capital that goes toward education is consumed by the tax authority, and so you have a loss of capital, and there's less opportunity in that marketplace than we want. We have about 10% of the students in the county are privately educated. The whole school board story about this partnership 7-2 vote in favor of continuing discussions, right? That's as far as it's said to go. It tells about what happens when you don't have real control. You don't have real local control. School boards have very little authority at all. They are a kind of simulacrum of democracy. They give a picture of people having a say, people having control of their own destinies, of parents having representation before the state to make this their local schools, their schools, right? Their neighborhood schools, make them good. And make them solid, make them sound, morally sound, educationally sound, pedagogically sound, intellectually honorable and true. When you have only a nominal control, you really have no control. There's just the pretense, the fiction that we control things, that we have a say. And Dr. Testament and one other school board member said, "No, we don't think this is the solution." When you have the state as a partner, you can be sure that you may avoid the signs of open failure, but you're still going to have, if you have a state ranking, still going to have the five bottom. You're always going to have five bottoms somewhere in some measure. I'd say rather than have administrative measures of what the five bottoms are, let there be a marketplace measure. And what happens to the five bottoms? Well, the five bottom schools in a free market simply close. They simply go away. The marketplace makes them go away because they can't meet requirements of the real consumer. In that case, the marketplace would be the family, and so those five would simply go away. In a marketplace, you would not have continually the five bottoms. The bottom five are there. You're always going to have a five bottom in the marketplace too, but they don't last. They are replaced. They close. They go under. Their board members resign. The parents look for better opportunities elsewhere. But when the state is your partner, you're always going to have the five bottoms, and they're not going to go away. And they're always going to be administratively there. They're always going to be continuing, you might say, to fail. Now, the failure that I'm mentioning here is simply those, is the failure in terms of what we're hearing in this story, right? There are other failures that are not in view in this narrative. But when the failure is open and you have scores that are low and so on, well, the state's going to be more aggressive. And that's what Candace McQueen has been proposing, a more aggressive relationship for tackling this problem that we have in Hamilton County. And there are a couple of quotes that I want to mention from the Chattanooga Times Free Press account of yesterday's meeting, and also that in Chattanoogan.com. Mr. Testament said, "These are our schools. It's a broken system, no doubt, but the state is as broken as we are." Well, I think that's probably true. Something to think about. He said, if the county gives up our schools, we may never get them back. In other words, if they go in the administrative category under this contract, this 5-year contract with the state, we may not get our schools back. So there's continuing illusion that these are in fact our schools, that they belong to us, and if they go into this program, where they get special attention, special care, special funding, we may not get our 5 back. And there's something to that, but there's something also, I would say, it sounds a little naive, perhaps. Senator Todd Gardenhire takes offense that there had not been enough discussion that there had not been enough discussion about the partnership zone. He said legislators had talked about it. He says in the Chattanooga.com story, it's time to make a decision. The thing has been discussed long enough. He said going ahead with this contract gives children in those schools the best opportunity to get help from every direction. Again, pretending that the state has solutions and that the state has answers. Well, this is David Tulis, and we're here at Nooga Radio. And I know that we have to have continuing conflagrations and decimation before people say, okay, we've had enough with what we've been offered. State run this and state run that. Let's have a marketplace. And so what we have to have is, in the end, the worst of the worst kind of disaster. And before people will agree that we should end monopolies, we should end cartels, which are state cartels. We should end them. We should get out of the school business. We're going to continue to have things like this, and that they're not worse, perhaps, is a sign of merit here in Chattanooga among people who make things work, right? Things that are unworkable, because Chattanooga and Hamilton County has good people in it. Things work better than they ought. Why does EPB work, which is socialized utility? Well, it works because of the individual men and women who run it, despite their system having congenital flaws, right? Congenital market flaws, the debts of which will be collected later when the bonds have their moment of crisis, and the ratepayers are going to be stuck paying the debt on outdated systems. I was reading a couple days ago the speech by President Trump before the United Nations, and speaking of the people of Chattanooga, and he of course is a nationalist, and I'm a localist. Okay, I'm a free market person. He is a progressive. Now, he has some wonderful things to say, and I want to just change the vocabulary just a little bit. He's talking about sovereign nations. Now, I'd say only God is sovereign and not nations. But let's just leave that dispute aside. He says, this is the beautiful vision of this institution, the United Nations, and this is the foundation for cooperation and success. Strong sovereign cities let diverse counties with different values, different cultures, and different dreams not just coexist, but work side by side on the basis of mutual respect. Now, of course, he didn't say cities and he didn't say counties. He said nations, strong sovereign nations let diverse countries, meaning other countries, is what he actually said, right? With different values, different cultures, and different dreams, work side by side. Well, what if we said cities? I think in the coming financial debacle, in the multi-$100 trillion debt markets that we're facing, we have the prospect of a devolution. It's already in progress. It began really by one account in 1945, but a long-term devolution of the state that in which I take a great deal of hope. He said, strong sovereign nations let their people take ownership of the future and control their own destiny. What if we said strong sovereign cities let their people take ownership? You see, that makes much more sense, because a city is much smaller. It's much more coherent. You have in a city, you're able to avoid the problem of size, right? The bigness problem that Leopold Kohr and other proponents of smallness have pointed out. And strong sovereign nations, he says, allow individuals to flourish in the fullness of life intended by God. I mean, I appreciate the fact that he mentions God here, but think about that. A strong sovereign nation, and how is the nation allowing you, the individual, to do something? How can there be a relationship between a government which controls more than 300 million people, regulates them, taxes them, micromanages their toilet tank sizes, and so on, and declares their marriages illegal? How can an entity that large with its 3 branches allow, as he says, individuals to flourish in the fullness of life intended by God? Well, that makes much more sense if you shrank the scale of operation down to, let's say, a county or a city. And then he could be saying, and strong sovereign cities allow individuals to flourish in the fullness. If Mayor Burke said this, changing the word to cities, it would make much more sense. It would be much more realistic because cities do have an ability to operate more on the individual level. And that's why I'm a localist. And the leading Nooga centrist, the name here is David Tulis. I do thank you for joining me. In America, President Trump said, "We do not seek to impose our way of life on anyone." Of course, that's kind of a joke, but rather let it shine as an example for everyone to watch. I say only God is sovereign. Then he says this in the end. He talks about the thing that we object to. We'll talk about this problem of regulation that pretends that courts don't exist. Regulation that brings about what he calls socialism and communism. He says, from the Soviet Union to Cuba to Venezuela, wherever true socialism or communism has been adopted. Of course, we don't have the true one here. That's what his point partly. Wherever true socialism or communism has been adopted, it has delivered anguish and devastation and failure. President Trump says, those who preach the tenets of these discredited ideologies only contribute to the continued suffering of the people who live under these cruel systems. America stands with every person living under a brutal regime. Of course, we don't have one, do we? Our respect for sovereignty is also a call for action. And here, though, here's the part of the paragraph that I would mark as bad, okay? All people deserve a government that cares for their safety, their interests, and their well-being, including their prosperity. Well, I don't want a government that cares for me. I don't care. I don't want it to care for me for anything. I don't want it to care about my education. I don't want it to care about my children. I don't want it to care about their interests, their well-being. That's the last thing we want, is for the nation, as it's called, the government in Washington, the civil magistrate in Washington, to care about these things. Well, this is David Tulis, and I'm trying to make note of what we had in the past few days. There's been huge interest on the internet in the Hanson Melvin story, especially my reporting of it. We've reported on that story in great detail here at Nooga Radio and at Nooganomics.com, our chief sponsor. And the Miranda story intersects with the Hanson Melvin story. He apparently is going to go today and pay off a fine that the state has against him. The fines that the state levies against individuals are effectively a civil capital punishment. If you're told you can't use the public road in your car, and that you have to walk everywhere, that is a form of capital punishment. It's not unto death, of course. It's a civil capital punishment, and the state levies that punishment readily against thousands and thousands of people all across the state of Tennessee, using its pretended control of the commercial use of cars and trucks to affect private use, and pretend to prohibit the private use of cars by people whose use of that car has nothing to do with they're fishing without a license, or they're doing something apart from some state permit, failing to show up, or failing to pay a fine, or failing to pay the probation officer, people who lose their driver licenses and thereby can't drive, quote unquote. The state is very abusive. Now, the Miranda rights story intersects with that, because Hanson Melvin was not read his Miranda rights when he was falsely arrested by Officer David Campbell. Jerry Summers, in a quick call this morning when I called him, he was driving into his office, and I said, Jerry, I need to get some feedback from you about this Miranda story that I've been developing. And he thinks maybe that I'm oversimplifying, and his discussion was very sympathetic to the officer. In other words, leave it up to the discretion of the officer when to read Miranda rights. I said, well, Jerry, the policy rules of the department themselves reflect the Miranda standard. And in the arrest manual, on 13-page arrest manual, on page 6, it talks about Miranda, what the Miranda warning is. Remember, you know what it is, right? You have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court, and you have a right to an attorney being present during questioning. That's Miranda, and that maintains the protection of a constitutional right against the compulsion to self-incriminate. Right? You're cannot be required to incriminate yourself in any statement or offering of evidence to an officer apart from your advice, or it has to be done voluntarily. And I said, yeah, but Jerry, that rule says that Miranda is supposed to be read right when someone's arrested. And then I said, but Jerry, don't you remember State versus Garcia, State versus Raspberry, and at least 2 other cases that make it very clear, following the Terry standards on arrest, that a stop equals an arrest equals a seizure. That's the rule. And so every stop of traffic has to be Mirandized. But clearly the problem is that puts a burden on the officer, and it makes law enforcement much more difficult and much less likely to occur. In other words, there'll be less enforcement of law. There'll be perhaps a greater percentage of belligerent contacts with the public will be for true crimes and not paper crimes or so-called commercial crimes. That's the result of that. So I'm not done with this story, and I've asked Rob Simmons again this morning by email. Please contact me and talk to me about the policy. What is not the policy of the department for every arrest going to be enforced? Is that not something that would be good for community policing? And I have a detailed analysis of the whole community policing project at Nooganomics.com. That's Nooganomics.com. Don't go there if you're not an important person. Don't go there. Please, don't go there. David Tulis.
3, 2, 1.